Hello everyone, and welcome to my Multimodal project. This video was made as a visual adaptation of my English 102 research project and essay over the history of 2D and 3D animation, and whether 2D animation is dead thanks to the creation of 3D animation. And what better way to show this than show you how several forms of animation are made? With that being said, let's jump straight into it. Starting off is 2D animation. When most people think of animation, they usually think of the hand-drawn frames that I'm making here, which is a process that really only started in the 1900s with films drawn in hand with pencil, such as Gertie the Dinosaur or The Sinking of the Lusitania. Later, however, new technology and innovations would help to refine and speed up this process, such as through the creation of cells, which allowed backgrounds and characters to be drawn on different transparent sheets. Additionally, there was the creation of the multiplane camera, which allowed for accurate and consistent photos of cells to be taken, and for panning shots of backgrounds to start to exist in animation. In later years, cells also allowed animators to add color to their cartoons. This was done mainly by painting the back of the celluloid sheets and then using either a Cinecolor camera, which mostly captured red, orange, and blue-green colors as seen in Fleischer's Poor Cinderella, or by using a Technicolor camera, which would capture a full spectrum of color. However, for a long period soon after Technicolor's creation, Disney held an exclusive license with them, which led to almost all studios at that time staying with black and white or using Cinecolor. These days, 2D animation has changed a bit. After all, you can see this animation is being created digitally thanks to the creation of more modern technology such as my Huion tablet and Clip Studio Paint here. However, this modern technology uses and adapts many of the tools used by traditional animators. For example, most animation and art software allows for layers where you can draw and animate things without affecting other parts of your animation, similar to how cells and a multiplane camera were used. And with that, here's our finished 2D animation. Next up is 3D animation. During the Disney Renaissance, which is when most classic 2D films like The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, and Hercules were made, a small group of animators wanted to experiment with the idea of using and developing computer software that could make computer-generated images, or rather, 3D animation. However, Disney as a studio didn't like this, as they thought there was no need for 3D if it couldn't save time or money. Plus, they believed computer animation would steal traditional animators' jobs, which led to several of these animators being fired. However, these people went on to develop the technology anyway, create their own studio called Pixar, and release the first ever 3D feature film, Toy Story, which surprisingly only came out 28 years ago, which is wild to think about how recent in history that is. Even in just 28 years though, 3D animation has come a long way. Today, programs like Blender or Maya, which is what I'm using here, are used for a majority of the process, from modeling the characters to rigging them, animating them, and finally rendering the final result. As a whole, 3D makes use of several techniques that came before it, such as the 12 principles of animation that Disney's 9 Old Men created, as well as the camera and filming techniques originally used for live-action filmmaking. Thanks to all of this, we see a great variety of styles in 3D animation, from shows like Arcane, where everything has a realistic feel and proportions, along with a more painterly and stylized touch, to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, where we see comic book illustration techniques used for shading like halftones and hatching, in conjunction with bleeding colors and text bubbles in certain places. And here's the finished 3D animation. With the history of 2D and 3D animation out of the way, now we can get to rotoscoping and modern 2D animation. Many people wonder why we have moved to more 3D animation, and the answer is simple: money. 2D animation done with traditional means can be quite expensive and takes a lot of time as well. However, one way of cutting these costs and the time needed is through a process called rotoscoping. In rotoscoping, you essentially trace over live action or 3D footage, so you are left with the illusion of a perfect traditional animation. This is hardly a new technique, however, as it dates back to the 1920s with Coco the Clown and Fletchingers out of the Inkwell series. In addition to this, I am also using a more modern technique commonly practiced in Japan with anime called animating on twos. When doing this, you draw 12 images for each 24 frames and have each individual image on screen for 2 frames instead of 1, like we see here a lot in the US. This allows animators' work to be cut in half right from the start and makes for a unique stylistic approach you can't really get otherwise. With that being said, here is the final result of the rotoscoped sequence. Last up on the docket is an animation using a process called tweening. This technique makes use of hand-drawn character models that are basically a 2D puppet that have been separated into different pieces and then rigged similar to 3D models. Using this puppet, you can set up specific poses, or keyframes, for the model to hit at certain points in time, and the software being used will naturally interpolate the frames between those keys to complete the motion. examples of this technique can be seen in a lot of younger kids shows, such as Bluey and Haley's On It, as well as for looping animations for art and video games such as Genshin Impact. Similar to rotoscoping, these techniques can save lots of time and money, all while emulating the look and feel of traditional, hand-drawn 2D animation. And here's the final animation. Overall, animation has changed a whole ton over the years. While many people argue that traditional 2D animation isn't a thing anymore, it's important to keep in mind that is only because technology has evolved and that the medium has adapted to reflect this. However, while major corporations who value money first have often switched gears to focus on 3D animation first and foremost, there are dozens of independent artists, filmmakers, and studios who value 2D techniques and styles more, and who think it will better suit their stories and will continue to use those techniques. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, learned a little, and have an amazing rest of your day. Bye!